Coming up on Regarding Men, movie review, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Well, hello there, friends, and welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. I'm Janice Fiamengo. I'm the author of the Fiamengo File. I'm joined today by Tom Golden of MenAreGood.
MenAreGood.
And Paul Elam of paulelam.com.
Men are good.
And today we're talking about... Today we're talking about the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, based on the Ken Kesey novel of the same title. And this movie came out in 1975, I believe. It was directed by Milos Forman. No, was it Milos Forman?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Milos Forman, a Czech emigre. And of course, as everybody probably knows, it's starring Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher, who plays Nurse Ratched. And the movie, as probably many of you know, is about a guy who is imprisoned. He's serving his sentence, and he is sent to a mental hospital. He seems to be perhaps faking a mental illness because he thinks that he'll have an easier time of it in the mental hospital. And once there, he discovers what's going on and leads an inmate's rebellion against the stultifying rules, the inhumanity, the forced conformity, the life-denying regulations at this mental hospital. And the movie, in a very general way, I guess, is about, it's about male or masculine vitality in its various forms against feminized authoritarianism and safetyism.
Yeah.
And what happens in the course of the movie is that ultimately, I guess, authoritarianism and safetyism triumph, though not entirely. How we get there and what we're left with at the end of this extremely bittersweet movie, this very warm, tragic comic film. That'll be our subject for today. But before we get into that, let's look at a trailer for the film and get a sense of some of the high points in the comic first part, the rebellious part.
All right, here we go.
Do you think it might be possible to turn that music down so maybe a couple of the boys could talk?
Your hand is staining my window.
God almighty, she's got you guys coming or going. A little change never hurt, huh? A little variety. Oh, come on. You're not gonna say that now. You're not gonna say that now. You're gonna pull that henhouse shit now when the vote the chief just voted it was 10-9. Now, I want that television set turned on right now!
I don't think he's overly psychotic.
No, I want something done!
I think he's dangerous.
Jesus, I mean, you guys do nothing but complain about how you can't stand it in this place here, and then you haven't got the guts just to walk out? I mean, what do you think you are, for Christ's sake, crazy or something? Well, you're not.
Hey, wait a minute. Hold it!
See how easy it is?
We're from the State Mental Institution. This is Dr. Cheswick, Dr. Tabor, Dr. Scanlon. I'm Dr. McMurphy.
Hey, Mikey! What? All right, take him over! Get down over here! Get up, Paige!
Okay.
So there it is. There it is. Wonderful. So many wonderful scenes. The acting is marvelous. Jack Nicholson is just stand out as the rebellious McMurphy. And yeah, all those scenes are the very warm, vibrant, and comic first part of the film. And one of the things that's so striking about the movie to me is how the mode of it shifts. I guess maybe 3/4 of the film is that it's the rebellion against authority, and the manner in which Nicholson leads, the Nicholson character leads his men, forms them into a vibrant, defiant group who come to recognize that the way they're being treated is wrong, and that they can demand different treatment. And it's wonderful. It's so funny, and one is buoyed up watching as a result of the humanity of the characters and the humanity with which McMurphy treats the other members of the hospital, and yet then the mode shifts and it becomes tragic at the end. And I find that shift particularly compelling because I think if you don't know anything about the film, you maybe expect it's going to be one of those triumphant movies of overcoming, where at the end, he's going to smash the window and they're all going to file out and they're going to go on and live their lives and leave this horrible place behind. Or perhaps, the horrible Nurse Ratched is going to be driven out, and a more humane leader is going to come in, and a different kind of institutional format is going to be introduced, or something is going to change, and there's going to be a triumph. But the ending is far more tragic, and although there is a suggestion that something has changed, it certainly involves the death of the protagonist and the defeat of his rebellious energy, although of course the chief does leave. So there's a kind of muted but tragic hope at the end, and I loved that about it. I think maybe some people might find that disappointing or disorienting. I loved it because to me it made it seem so true. And there are so many scenes that are true in that sense. Yeah. Anyway, let's there's so many places to go from there.
One of the things that I noticed about the film was just that when McMurphy got them together and did things like on that boat, those guys became alive. They became alive and animated. They were living. They were aware, and they were doing something fun together. Whereas in the hospital, they're dead. They're just freaking dead, So it was this juxtaposition of McMurphy coming in and really bringing to life these guys who before had been dead. And he did that for each one individually in some ways. He made them become alive, which was kind of a masculine spirit thing as far as I was concerned. It's kind of the masculine way. He was going to not take shit, and he was going to push the limits, and he was going to call these guys guards, and when he did, and they went along with him, they became alive, which was just was very. I liked that part,
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed. I think this is maybe one of the best movies I've ever seen, and I don't think I came to that conclusion until I watched it this time. Yeah. I was saying earlier before we started recording that I had seen it many, many years ago. I loved it then. I really loved it now. And what struck me about it, though, was this, ostensibly you've got this expose of the mental health system and the lack of rights people have. And they show McMurphy questioning his medicine and the option he's given. Well, if you don't want to take a pill, we can arrange for another way to get it to you. And in a psychiatric hospital, for those that know, that means that they are willing to tackle you, hold you down, and inject you full of the drugs that you don't want to take.
Exactly.
But more than the mental health system, what I was struck by was this whole story was analogous to the male psyche being at war with female relational aggression.
Yes.
And there's a couple of points about that coming into it. You notice one, Tom, when we were talking to Warren earlier, you brought up in your clinical work with couples of having to teach men how to say what they need
Yes.
in a relationship. And
Yes.
what you're struck by in the very first group therapy session with Nurse Ratched in charge of it is that none of these men want to talk. They're all cowed by her. They're all afraid of her. They're
Right.
afraid to express their needs.
Right.
Well, in bounces McMurphy. And guess what? McMurphy is the red pill.
Yes.
He's
Yes.
the very anthropomorphized embodiment of the red pill. He wants what he wants. He will say what he wants. He will demand what he thinks he has a right to. He will not care who it bothers, who it offends. And instantly, he is marked for death.
Yes.
I mean, I think I knew in the first time I saw this movie that this guy was a goner the moment he crossed this nurse.
Right.
And this whole story that unfolds is about teaching these guys to say what they want.
Right.
The
Yes.
scene where Cheswick just goes ballistic in there wanting his cigarettes, and it ends up in a fiasco. And the other men talking about what they want, starting to articulate that.
Yes.
And that is more than the female in charge is going to try to handle.
Right.
I also note the role of the chief, the Native American that's in there, this mountain of a man representing a huge amount of unexpressed male power that is deaf and dumb in the hospital environment. And it takes McMurphy to start drawing him out.
Yes.
And he plays a role at the end that we'll discuss more later. But I think it was a perfect representation of the masculine energy that in all the men that were in that ward. If you took all their power, all their strength, and put it into one person, you get the chief.
Yeah.
All their repressed power and strength. And I think that was his purpose to the plot, is to have this wealth of power that is in men is never expressed when they're up against relational aggression in women. Because, when Tom was talking about having to train guys to say what they want in relationships, this is true for men across the Western world.
Yes.
I mean, there are definitely red pill guys like us, and there's some other men that will always say what they want and make demands on their own behalf. But most men fall silent at the power of women. And when I talk to them individually, we find that they've lived lives in deference to the wishes of their wives or girlfriends
Right.
or whatever. And they don't know. Tom's absolutely right. They don't know how to express what they want. But because there's a price to pay. And the movie did not pull any punches on that either.
Yes.
Right.
For men to assert for themselves and to demand what they want and what they need out of life in the face of opposing desires by women is a catastrophe waiting to happen
Yes.
for many men.
Yes.
They can handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of reading it, I think, because I initially expected that it was going to be a movie about the mental health industry and its cruelties, the horrific nature of its practices, its denial of basic rights to those who are in its care, that sort of thing. And you can certainly watch it that way. And I have to say that I originally saw this movie in grade 12. We read the Ken Kesey novel when I was in grade 12, and then our teacher, trying to get us interested, of course, and get us into debates about the book and the movie version, showed us the movie. I don't remember any of that. I don't remember the novel. And so the novel may be more specifically focused on the issue of mental health and mental health treatment. To me, the movie could be criticized on that ground. I don't know whether you guys agree, in that I think it does romanticize mental illness in the sense that these guys are all, they're totally benign, really. Sweet, innocent, they're not a danger to themselves or others. The fishing scene is, the most joyous. There we see them, and it's the idea that these men, there's nothing wrong with these men, that if they were given the opportunity to be themselves and to be their masculine selves, and to express their agency, to do things, to do masculine things like fish or watch the World Series, indeed, that they would be better. It's wonderful, and I love that moment when the Jack Nicholson character is trying to get them out of trouble. They're challenged by whoever runs that marina, or somebody who works there. Hey, what are you doing? Getting on this boat, and he introduces them all as doctors, and the camera goes to each one, and they look like doctors. Exactly. All of a sudden. And it's wonderful. That's the movie at its most comic and affirmative of the individual masculine spirit of each of these men. It's also, I think you could say, if you wanted to be critical, it's the most it's the most fake in a way, in that it denies that there's anything wrong with these men, and suggests therefore that mental illness in general is a social construct, which was part of that whole anti-psychiatry movement of the 1960s that Ken Kesey was a part of, that R.D. Laing was a part of. The notion that, to be insane was actually a sane response to an insane society, and therefore what we needed to do was open the institutions and simply, deny that there is such a thing as mental illness. I think that the film is part of that. In a way, you can see that romanticizing that's going on. I'm not sure if I'm right about that, but that was my sense. But I see the film as much more like an allegory about the masculine, really, and about how the masculine is a part of, in this case, nonconformism, of individual defiance against a stultifying society of authoritarian conformity as it's represented by feminine authoritarianism, and the feminine form that it takes, which we certainly see all around us in our society today, and which was beginning to be expressed at that time in the 1970s. So the film has expresses a real horror of this kind of safetyism. It's for the good of all. Oh no, we mustn't change it because the inmates need their routine. And if you want to disrupt that, you want to harm people rather than liberate them. And I thought that was so very powerfully represented. And I love so much of the movie is about masculine energy in various forms, sexual energy, certainly, which is presented as a positive, totally positive throughout the movie, that disrupts. And it's so interesting how most of those conversations that Nurse Ratched forces on those men are totally inappropriate. It seems to me for her and this other nurse to be sitting there judging and guiding and instructing these men. They're mostly about sexual matters, Harding's problems with his wife, the young Billy Bibbitt's problems with women, and she's sitting there shaming these men about their sexuality and their feelings around their sexual relationships, and that's presented as so damaging to these men. And I thought those were the most brilliant scenes of analysis and criticism of feminine authoritarianism in the whole film.
Yeah, that's what I saw as, I think it's about is bullying. Ratched was a bully, and she's got a bully in training sitting right next to her there. And what is relational aggression, Paul? It's bullying without violence, and that is exactly what Ratched does. She bullies without violence.
It includes proxy violence, which Ratched uses.
Get somebody else to do
alacrity.
Yes. And I think Paul's right. These men are sitting there powerless in the face of this relational aggression I mean, she is just this bully, and McMurphy's not going to take it. He's not going to take this bully crap. He comes from. In fact, it was really interesting. McMurphy talked about how he had more autonomy at the jail than he does at the mental place. And I thought that was really a critical point on his part. Was that I got more autonomy there? We could watch the World Series there. They wouldn't think of not putting it on.
But a woman wasn't in charge.
Exactly.
That's it.
At the jail. I think it was very telling that the way that McMurphy got to the men was through masculine endeavors. The World Series, fishing, women, all these things come into play, and that is what is disruptive to the environment there and disruptive to the control of Nurse Ratched, and why she unleashes the fury of hell on McMurphy and on all the men for rebelling against her. I think it's also very interesting to point out that Billy Bibbett, I've forgotten the guy's name who played him, Brad Dourif, really, really great actor in that role. Makes me feel very dated to know that the guy that played Billy Bibbett is now 70 years old. My research did not make me smile on that, but just the same, this was a young man who had a castrating mother. It was revealed through the script that his mother was very judgmental, shaming, and punitive. It left him with a speech impediment, unable to talk. And the one moment in the film that he's able to talk without stammering was right after he had this sexual encounter with the girl that came with McMurphy. And he felt satisfied and whole and a little bit like a man. And of course, then, and I think this again I think it's brilliant script writing. Ratched threatens, what about when I tell your mother? So now we've got the power of Ratched as a woman that she's already exercising all over everybody. And now she brings in the castrating power of a punitive, shaming mother. And it's too much, and the boy kills himself. It was gynocentrism and the power of relational aggression that killed that young man. And there's no bones about it. And that's why I think it's understandable that one of the more cathartic scenes in the whole movie was when McMurphy loses it and goes to try to kill her, to strangle her. And I got to admit, at that point, I was hoping he could finish the job.
Fletcher apparently said that when she went to see the movie in theaters, that people would cheer when she was being strangled, Of
course.
People would cheer. The American Institute of Film, or something like that, lists her in the top 5 of film villains. And top 2 for female villains. She's number 2. Who's the other one?
Glenn Close in
the
Fatal
Wicked
Attraction?
Witch of the West.
Totally fantastic.
So she's second to the Wicked Witch of the West. And that says a lot. People really hated her watching that. They hate this relational aggression. They hate this bullying that they see. But they
because we recognize it, and because she is an archetype. That's why. I mean, she is in a way a fairy tale character. She is the archetype of the devouring mother, the devouring feminine that will control with smiles and a soft voice and playing that music and pretending to be democratic. Well, we have to have a vote if you're going to, disrupt the schedule because that's not fair to the other inmates. It's because we recognize that, and we recognize that it has been translated into a very specific and very repressive type of social power that we can all recognize today in hospitals that are becoming increasingly feminized, and I would say increasingly authoritarian in this way. And there's my phone going off.
No.
I don't know where it is. I'm sorry about that.
You're just too
I can't
popular.
turn it off. I forgot about it. And that we see this, of course, all around. We see it in big tech censorship, We see it in HR departments in which female employees can complain about a colleague whose attitude they don't like and who is therefore immediately disciplined and perhaps even dismissed. I mean, we see this kind of feminine, authoritarian judgmentalism and attempt at social control everywhere. And she is such a brilliant representation of what that looks like.
Yes, and this thing spreads a lot farther than just the hospital, and like you're saying, spreads out to the organizations we see. The director of the film, Foreman, was from Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And let me show you a quote this guy came up with. Listen to this. To me, the story was not just literature, but real life. The life I lived in Czechoslovakia from my birth in 1932 until 1968. The Communist Party was my Nurse Ratched, telling me what I could and could not do, what I was or was not allowed to say, where I was and was not allowed to go, even who I was and was not.
Right.
So it's a global movie also. To him, it was about totalitarianism. That Ratched was a symbol of that. Isn't that fascinating?
Mm-hmm.
Shades of where we're heading right now.
Exactly, Paul. Exactly.
Well, that's it.
And people don't know it. They don't know that they're heading for Nurse Ratched.
Yeah, well, and that's...
What's worse about that is that it's revealed in the movie, and I think, again, this was really just wonderful script writing, that these guys were there voluntarily.
Yes,
exactly. That's
they
it.
wanted to be there. And how many times have you, as a red pill person, tried to talk to a blue pill man about how he's operating in his marriage, always giving his wife what she wants, being told who he is and who he isn't, where he can go, where he can't go.
Exactly.
The very thing that were just outlined in that statement from the director.
Exactly.
And then you try to get the logic going in their head about what kind of life is that really, and their eyes glaze over and they sort of go off into la-la land, unable to compute anything that you're saying. Men sign up for this shit. They do. They sign up and they stay there in spite of all the abuse and all the direction. And I think what we had on the ward in the vote were nine guys were able to vote. The other 9 of the 18 on the ward, I think those were the men who were too far gone. I think those were the men who were so blue-pilled out that there was no retrieving, that they would never reclaim their lives again, never reclaim their masculinity. The 9 who could vote were the guys who had a shot at making different decisions.
Yes.
And Murphy was the catalyst for making that happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But and interestingly enough, I mean, I thought, that is so crucial. That, I mean, first of all, they don't vote with him, even though they did want to hear the World Series. You know, one guy sort of has his hand, not sure, and I've sat in meetings where people voted like that because they were afraid of what their colleagues thought of them. But anyway, so they're afraid to support him against Nurse Ratched. Then ultimately they do. But the revelation that these men most of them are not being kept against their will, that they are there of their own volition, living under this regime, that is incredible in the movie. And I also thought that it was quite a powerful moment too, in the final confrontation between Billy Bibbit and Nurse Ratched, when she begins to shame him. At first, he is defiant and he speaks without a stutter. He's spent the night with a woman. He's had sex with her. He's slept with her. And that was all the doing, really, of McMurphy. And so McMurphy has given him that gift of his masculine sexuality and his masculine self. And so he's able to challenge Nurse Ratched in that moment. But then when she evokes his mother, we see him start to crumple. We see her power in the ascendancy. And he loses that confidence. He begins to stutter again. He becomes afraid. He starts to twist his body into knots. He cowers in front of her. And at that moment, he tries to put the blame on others. And he even tries to blame McMurphy himself. And he's not, totally dishonest there, because it was McMurphy's idea. And he says, well, it was McMurphy, who made me do it, or who forced me. and as a way of excusing himself and escaping the punishment, but the punishment is going to come anyway. And I just thought that was such a powerful symbol of what happens to the person who tries to bring liberation, that often that person is not supported and even blamed.
Yes.
As others who admire that person in some way, are inspired by that person, want that liberation, but are also afraid of it. And in the moment of having to face an accusation by the authoritarian power figure, they try to deflect the blame onto that other person. And just the complexity of the response of those who are being abused in an abusive regime. I thought that was really beautifully portrayed in the film.
Yes.
There was one other subtle moment that I thought was real important to the story, and if you blinked, you might not have seen it. But there was a scene where Cheswick was acting out in the group, getting escalated, and Ratched was trying to tell him to sit down and be quiet. And McMurphy at one point turns and tells him to sit down and be quiet, and he obeys. And you see the look on her face when she recognizes that he responded to McMurphy's instruction. It didn't matter to her that he was sitting down and calm. It had to be her issuing the order.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, read that exactly on her face. This was all about her control of these men.
Yes.
This is the story, and this is the story of men frequently in shitty relationships with abusive women. You couldn't paint a more accurate depiction of those relationships than what they did between Nurse Ratched and all the men on that psychiatric ward.
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah, it's I just found it a really compelling allegory, and it is interesting to me that it chose to go for the tragic. It didn't choose what it could have done and what many films do, the moment where finally the figure of resistance emerges and he says, we're not going to take it anymore. And they all pile out and the figure of authority is shamed and defeated in turn. And, it's this message of joyful liberation. It certainly seemed like it might be going that way at various points in the film. And the Nicholson character is all about liberation of various sorts: sexual liberation, emotional liberation, self-fulfillment, self-assertion. And yet and it's strange that it's almost as if he chooses to sacrifice himself at the end. He stays. That night he had planned his escape. There's going to be the grand party, the wildness, the evening of misrule, of insubordination all around, and it takes place, and it's a wonderful scene. And yet he doesn't leave at the moment that he could have. Now that it could have just been miscalculation. He drinks a lot. He gets too involved in his celebration, passes out, and wakes up when it's too late to leave. You could read it as he decides to stay. He wants Billy to have that night in bed with the woman, with his friend, and he decides to take the risk that he's going to blow all of his own chances for survival on that gift that he's giving to his friend.
Yes.
Or maybe he believes that he can ultimately triumph, because of course he's had electroshock therapy. He's come out, pretending to have been, cowed by it, pretending that his brain is now addled and winking at the chief. So perhaps he believes in his own power to resist whatever they have. But of course, what they have is something far more powerful even than that. Right. And we know at the end that he is ultimately lobotomized and is beyond redemption at that point. And so it's I don't know. I mean, it's like many wonderful endings. There are all sorts of ambiguities that aren't really definitively answered in the film, but it's a very powerful portrayal of how the system ultimately can destroy anybody it wants to. Yes. And his spirit may live on.
little bit different
Yeah.
in the takeaway from that. Of course, in the end, McMurphy is lobotomized. His brain is ruined. The chief looks at him and understands that everything McMurphy was is gone. And he said,
Exactly.
I'm not going to leave you here to rot like this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
he dispatches McMurphy by putting a pillow over his face and holding it down. And even though McMurphy's body is resisting, he knows this guy's mind is gone. But here's the takeaway I took from this. If the chief is representative of masculine power, which I believe he is, in the end, it is the chief that moves the immovable object. He rips it out of the floor, throws it through the window, and he escapes. So to me, the takeaway from that is that we all have this power. That power is often silent and dormant in all of us in different ways, but we have it nonetheless. We just have to be motivated to actually do something with it. And from what I've seen of most men in my life, most of them never do anything with that power. They use enough power to serve others, and a small, wonderful handful of men go out there and make huge changes in the world. But most men probably would have been Billy Bibbit more than the chief.
Yeah. That's what we're
interesting,
socialized
yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and I mean, you could also read it that there are two figures of very powerful masculine energy, and the one sacrifices himself so that the other is able to make the escape, and that's what happens with the chief. And he's selected, I assume. I mean, I don't know why exactly. As a indigenous man, he's even more outside his society, more of an alienated outsider than the Jack Nicholson character, who is already also, he says he what does he say? He's somebody who fucked and fought too often or something. That's the reason he's in jail in the first place.
It's true.
The indigenous man is even more of an outsider, and therefore perhaps even less susceptible to the kind of brainwashing and techniques of control. He has seen his own father destroyed, as he tells McMurphy, and he was determined not to be got at. He says, they're working on you the way they worked on him being his father, and he saw his father destroyed by these forces in society.
That's
so
right.
in a way, he knows the full evil and the full destructiveness of the society, and he has armed himself up until this point with the only way he could think of to prevent it, by pretending to be deaf and dumb so that they wouldn't work on him.
And it worked.
He gathers his power through observing McMurphy and hiding that power until he is ready to act. So you can certainly give that a really interesting allegorical reading. And so that is the hopefulness of the ending, is that he does make his escape. Most of the men do not follow. They're pleased that he gets out, but they're still there in that environment. And of course, McMurphy is dead. So it's a really sad ending too.
I would add one more positive, and that is that look at the closeness between these men. I mean, Chief and Mac were close, especially when Mac found out that he was faking, But they were close. Billy and Mac, the guy at the end who's saying, "I'll never forget you." I mean, these were men who got close when they challenged the status quo, when they challenged the bullying. They suddenly got close. It reminds me of Regarding Men, where we see these men who are challenging the system, they're getting close together. It seems similar to me in some ways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the best part of the movie. That sense of the camaraderie and the liberation from the death in life that they've been living up until then. It's so well done. And it also makes me think, I honestly, this is a movie that could not be made today.
Right.
I think.
Right.
In
way.
the sense that it's to the anger, the animus against feminine authoritarianism is way too overt. It would never be allowed today. Even like things that are acceptable within the world, even within the repressive world of the film, like joking about sexual matters, having cards with women, naked women in seductive poses on them, and that's okay. That's allowed. Even having a discussion at the beginning of the film between McMurphy and the overseeing doctor who was in charge of the hospital about his conviction for statutory rape. Remember, he says, well, she was 15 going on 35, and she was very willing. Like, that wouldn't be allowed today. Even like just the fact that masculine sexual energy is presented as a liberating force in that film against the stultifying, life-denying force of feminine energy, that wouldn't be allowed. It's amazing. It just, then that proves to me that the very thing the film is objecting to has spread through popular culture, through journalism, through academic culture, certainly through government, the medical profession, all the way through politics. It far more. I mean, it was there in germ form and seed form in the 1970s, and it has grown much more powerful ever since then. And a Czech from a communist society was able to see the direction in which the society was going and where we have arrived today with cancel culture, with all the stuff about hate speech, with COVID, authoritarianism, and everything else. I mean, we now see the full flowering of that culture of safetyism, and it's for your own good. So shut up while we inject you with something.
Yes.
It's all coming true.
It is. And what's amazing is this film was extremely popular at the time. I mean, they won the Academy Award for Best Picture, for Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Director. I think that's one of the few times that it's ever been a Grand Slam where all of those things were won by the same movie.
Yeah, they cleaned house.
They really did. And rightly so, man. Great movie.
I watched several different reviews in preparation for this, none of which I felt like understood the movie at all. It was just like they just didn't get what was really going on in the movie. Yeah. But one of the reviews pointed out there was a feminist critique of the movie. And their assertion was that all the men on the ward were quiet and silent because they couldn't handle a woman with power. Never mind that she was a fucking tyrant, destroying people in her wake anytime they made at least a little nuisance of themselves to her routine. That didn't matter. She was a woman with power, and men can't handle with women with power.
I
don't know what movie you were watching, but it wasn't the same one I saw.
I ran into a feminist review, and let me give you a quote. "The big nurse happens to also be the big victim when viewed with an awareness of the social and economic exploitation of women."
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Unbelievable that they can turn that into her being a victim. It's like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and consider another little just nuanced thing about this. The patriarchs of the story, which are the doctors of the hospital, the medical director and the other doctors, they're all males, all deferring to her.
Right. Yeah.
She's the best nurse we have.
The greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
And basically, they were there as exactly like Joe Biden and other figures in government are now, to do the express will, no matter how destructive, no matter how abusive it is, to do the express will of the woman in the room. That's exactly the picture they painted in the movie, and that's another reason they could never make this movie now. It would not stand a chance.
And to get paid. You and I both remember the psychiatrist that would come on to the unit and go to the charting room and sit there and write charts and then walk out. Never see anybody, you know?
Yep.
They weren't in charge of that unit.
They'd walk down the hallway in the ward and wave at the patients, and then go in and chart and charge $200, $300 for a 50-minute visit with patients. And we literally called it wave therapy because that's what they did. Yes. And they left the charge nurses in there really doing patient care.
Yep.
And often they were abusive, controlling lunatics themselves.
Amen
We had
to that.
another on the unit is what's the difference between the patients and the staff? Is eventually the patients get better and go home.
Yeah.
I've worked in 4 or 5 units like that, and man, I'm telling you, the amount of controlling nurses you run into is amazing.
It is amazing, and I mean they are viciously controlling.
Maybe I had to buy a sample, but whoo.
Well, then you and I ran across the same sample in 2 different states and probably 10, 15 different facilities.
Wow.
And the problem was that the techs who were there were all college graduates. But the nurses and the charge nurse even sometimes was, never had a college degree. So they were intimidated by the guys. And man, well, we'll stop there.
Well,
But,
yeah, I mean,
the other thing is this place, they filmed it in an actual mental hospital. The mental hospital that was literally, and man, the charts looked exactly the same as I remember in the in the early 70s. They were exactly the same. And apparently this hospital is still functioning now. How about that?
Wow.
Oh, lucky them. Hope we got a better charge nurse.
Oh, God.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's the film's depiction of what happens when you put certain types of people in these positions of power, what happens to those in that person's power, that it's really just absolutely right on.
Yep, I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
And it is a sad affair indeed, but we cover sad affairs here.
Yes, we do.
It's this one I couldn't recommend more highly. It's wonderful, just a wonderful, insightful film, and you'll never see one like that today. Never.
Nope. Too honest.
Yeah, too honest.
There's no female hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, just a female villain. That alone would discount it.
That's it. That's it. Oh, God.
I want to remember before we close out, because I sense we're coming to a close of this discussion, that if you look along the bottom of the screen there, you will see a little green box by our names. We have sworn off Facebook. We have sworn off Twitter. We are done with censorious big tech platforms. And we're starting afresh and anew on Gab.com. You can find Tom on Gab at TR Golden. You can find me at Elam. And you can find Janice Fiamengo at, interestingly enough, Janice Fiamengo on Gab. Come follow us there. It's a free speech platform. If I put a post up there, it's going to stay there. And I won't suddenly disappear for 30 days like I keep doing on Facebook. And you know why. But if we want to combat the censoring that's going on and the cancel culture, we got to quit patronizing censorious platforms and feeding the monster. Exactly. And so that's what we're trying to do with this. Yeah. And we appreciate you coming to follow us there. Links below for all of us.
Good deal. That's good. Are we finished?
I think we are.
All right.
There's something left to say, I think.
I think there is.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
What is that?
Men.
R.
We fucked it up again.
No, we didn't.
Yes. I said R, then you said R.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. Is he teasing me, Janice?
I didn't hear him saying anything. So.
Man.
I think we could have put Tom in electroshock. Good.
Good. Success. Success. I hope this is the right button to push. We'll see you guys.
Yes,